The grand holographic display flickered to life over Earth's major cities and human colonies scattered across the stars. A being unlike anything humanity had ever seen, tall, with glowing eyes and shimmering scales, stood regal and unmoving. It spoke with a voice that boomed across languages, bypassing translation systems with eerie precision. "I am Heskar, eternal of the Xerak, and you stand before divinity," the being announced. "We are the gods of this galaxy, worshipped by countless civilizations, and now, you too, shall bow." The message was transmitted simultaneously across every human colony and station, the same declaration echoing across the cosmos. Behind Heskar, massive ships hovered in orbit, vast, city-sized vessels that pulsed with alien energy. They radiated power and majesty, meant to inspire awe and submission. "Bow to us, humans," Heskar continued, his gaze unblinking. "Worship us, as those before you have done for eons. Offer tribute or face annihilation." In most corners of the galaxy, this announcement would have been met with fear and immediate submission. Entire civilizations had crumbled beneath the Xerak's shadow, their leaders offering temples and gold, desperate for mercy. For ages, the Xerak had cemented their rule through deception and force, shrouding their technology in mysticism, masquerading as divine beings. But here, on Earth, aboard bustling space stations, in outposts beyond the edges of known space, the reaction was quite different. Silence followed the proclamation for several seconds. Then, someone started laughing. In the command room of Earth's coalition headquarters, the galaxy's newest gods had just demanded submission from the wrong audience. A snort escaped Admiral Vasquez, who sat at the head of the room, arms folded. She exchanged a glance with Dr. Ethan Grant, one of the lead scientists at the research division. The man, unshaven and bleary-eyed from working through the night, chuckled softly under his breath. "You gotta be kidding me," Grant muttered, rubbing his temples. "That was unexpected," Vasquez added dryly, biting back a grin. Across the room, officers, engineers, and political representatives gathered for an emergency meeting, still processing what had just happened. "Is this some kind of elaborate prank?" one of the diplomats whispered, incredulous. "Nope," Vasquez replied. "That was a real transmission. And apparently we just got drafted into a new religion." Another burst of laughter rippled through the room, this one louder and more deliberate. Dr. Grant leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "They want us to bow to them, huh? We've faced hostile empires, rogue AIs, and asteroid collisions. And now we're supposed to worship some glow-in-the-dark space lizards? That's bold," someone muttered. More laughter followed, scattered and nervous at first, then more deliberate. The tension that had hung in the room like a suffocating cloud broke, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. Admiral Vasquez shook her head, grinning despite herself. "Well, this is a new one. Gods threatening us. Guess there's a first time for everything." Another officer leaned forward. "Should we, send back a polite refusal? Explain that humans don't exactly do worship?" "Polite?" Vasquez scoffed. "Number, I think we can do better than that." The Admiral stood and tapped a button on the table's display console. A projection of the Xerak fleet in orbit above Earth appeared, their gleaming ships radiating power and menace. She stared at the projection for a moment, lips tightening into a determined smile. "All right, folks," Vasquez announced, her voice taking on the calm, commanding tone of someone who had seen far worse and lived to tell the tale. "Let's skip the negotiations and figure out how to tear these gods apart." Within hours, work began across the entire human network. Stealth drones were launched toward the Xerak fleet, disappearing into the void like silent phantoms. Surveillance satellites reconfigured their sensors to monitor the energy signatures coming from the alien ships. Hackers, engineers, and scientists got to work, dissecting the transmission the Xerak had broadcast to uncover every bit of data they could. "These so-called gods want us to bow," Dr. Grant muttered, hunched over his workstation. "Let's see how divine they are when we start reverse engineering their tech." On a whiteboard behind him, someone had scribbled in bright red marker, "Project Deicide," a cheeky name that quickly became the rallying cry of humanity's counteroffensive. While the engineers worked around the clock, teams of linguists and historians delved into the galactic legends about the Xerak. What they found was illuminating. The Xerak weren't gods at all. "They've just been playing a long con," said Una Patel, a cultural historian who had spent years studying the myths of other species. "They're good at it too. They've used fear and technology to trick civilizations into worshipping them. They manipulate storms on primitive worlds, create holographic avatars, and disguise their weapons as acts of divine wrath," Patel explained during a briefing. "It's clever. Every time they enter a new system, they appear as invincible, all-knowing being, but in the end, it's just smoke and mirrors." Admiral Vasquez leaned back in her chair, considering this. So, they're not gods, they're con artists. Dr. Grant grinned. Then we're not fighting gods, we're fighting scammers with some fancy tech. This just got a whole lot more fun. The plan came together rapidly. Step 1. Expose the Xerox for what they really were. If the humans could disrupt their projection systems and broadcast the truth to the rest of the galaxy, the other species that worship the Xerox might turn on. People are only loyal to gods when they think the gods are real, Vasquez mused during one of the planning sessions. If we show everyone that these gods can bleed, well, they won't look so divine anymore. The key was hijacking the Xerox technology. The fleet orbiting Earth was equipped with massive energy projectors, designed to create illusions that would inspire awe and submission. If humanity could disable those systems, or better yet, take control of, the illusion would crumble. The team settled on their target, the flagship of HFY, Eternal, of the Xerox. That was where the primary projection systems were housed. A small infiltration team would board the ship, disable the systems, and broadcast the truth to the galaxy. It would be dangerous, borderline suicidal, but humanity didn't back down from a challenge. As the operation ramped up, tension gave way to gritty determination and irreverent humor. On the comms, one of the engineers remarked, "I still can't believe they thought we'd worship them." Another replied, "I know, right? I mean, they have fancy ships, sure, but so do we, and we've got coffee. Gods don't even have coffee." "Yeah," someone else chimed in. "How divine can you be if you've never pulled an all-nighter with bad caffeine and duct tape?" The room burst into laughter, the kind that only comes from people who refuse to let fear get the better of them. With every passing hour, the plan moved closer to execution. Stealth ships were prepared. Engineers ran final diagnostics. Hackers refined the code they would use to hijack the Xerox systems. There was no bowing, there was no fear. As the clock ticked down to the mission's launch, Dr. Grant leaned back in his chair, smiling to himself. They had gods knocking on their door, and humanity's response was to roll up their sleeves and get to work. Because, after all, no one tells humans what to do. And gods were just the next puzzle to solve. The launch bay hummed with controlled chaos as our human operatives prepared for the mission. Engineers performed final checks on the stealth ships, tightening bolts and running diagnostics on the communication relays. Soldiers secured their gear, adjusting armor and loading rifles, though their primary weapons for this mission weren't guns. They were tools, code, and cunning. Dr. Ethan Grant stood at the edge of the launch bay, hands shoved in his pockets, watching the organized frenzy unfold. This wasn't a typical battle, not by human standards anyway. The mission was to infiltrate the Xerox flagship, disrupt their illusions, and broadcast the truth to the galaxy. The stakes were high, but instead of fear, the air buzzed with excitement. It was as if humanity had been waiting for a challenge like this all along. Grant turned as Captain Elena Vasquez strode toward him, helmet tucked under one arm. Her sharp eyes scanned the bay, her expression calm and focused. She carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before and come out the other side. "Everything ready?" Vasquez asked, stopping beside Grant. He gave a lopsided grin. "Ready as we'll ever be. Got the stealth ships prepped, hacking modules primed, and our favorite code monkeys are chomping at the bit to break into those systems." He nodded toward the tech team, who were exchanging excited high fives. Vasquez smirked. "And the soldiers?" "Locked and loaded," Grant replied, "though I think they're just excited to prove a point." Vasquez arched a brow. "What point?" Grant chuckled. "That gods are overrated." Mission briefing. T-15 minutes. In the central command room, the infiltration team gathered around a holographic display of the Xerox flagship, its sleek design glowing ominously in the projection. The hologram spun slowly, revealing key access points and structural weaknesses identified by human reconnaissance. Vasquez stood at the front, addressing the assembled crew. "All right, listen up. You've all seen the schematics. The flagship is the source of their projection systems, the ones that make these frauds look like gods. Our job is to shut it all down." She tapped the hologram, zooming in on the core of the ship, where on the projection matrix and neural dampeners the infiltration were housed. "The systems we're targeting are heavily shielded. Once we get inside, we'll need to plant jammers and upload a virus to disable their control grid. Once that happens," she smiled thinly, "well, that's when the fun begins." One of the soldiers raised a hand. "How much resistance should we expect?" "Plenty," Vasquez replied. "The Xerox aren't invincible, but they're not pushovers either. Once they realize we're on board, they'll throw everything they've got at us." The soldier grinned. "Good. It's been a while since I got to fight a god." As the team prepared to board the stealth ships, Tara Patel, the mission's lead engineer, approached Grant with a grin on her face. "I've got something for you," she said, holding up a small device no bigger than a deck of cards. Grant raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Patel winked. "A little gift for the gods. It's a signal disruptor. Once we activate it, their holograms will go haywire. Imagine this. their divine avatars glitching and flickering mid-speech. Grant chuckled. I love it. Nothing like showing the galaxy that gods have software bugs. The stealth ships launched from the bay, silent and invisible, to Xerac sensors. Each ship carried a mix of engineers, hackers, and soldiers, people chosen not just for their skills, but for their ability to think on their feet. Inside one of the ships, Captain Vasquez strapped herself into the pilot's seat, glancing back at her team. This isn't just a mission, she said quiet, her voice steady. This is about more than survival. It's about proving that no one has the right to demand worship. Not from us, not from anyone. Her team nodded in silent agreement. This was personal. The ship's engines hummed as it glided toward the Xerac flagship, slipping past patrols and automated defenses. The target was within reach. The stealth ship docked undetected, its airlock hissing as the infiltration team boarded the Xerac vessel. The corridors were pristine and alien, humming with faint energy that felt almost alive. Holographic glyphs shimmered along the walls, giving the illusion of divine symbols. Remember, Vasquez whispered over the comm, this isn't magic, it's just tech, and we're better at tech than they are. The team moved with precision, splitting into groups to plant EMP charges and signal jammers at key points. Grant's fingers danced over his tablet, his eyes scanning the ship's systems as they broke into the network. Patel, you're up, Grant whispered into the comm. Start the upload. Patel grinned, fingers flying across her console. The virus wormed its way into the flagship's core systems, corrupting their holographic projectors. The first sign that something was wrong came when Heskar's divine avatar began to flicker. The towering, shimmering figure that had inspired fear across the galaxy glitched and stuttered, its glowing eyes flickering like a malfunctioning screen. Alien soldiers on board the flagship stared in confusion as their god's perfect form warped and distorted. One of the soldiers whispered, "What's happening?" The answer came in the form of a burst of static across every communication channel. Then, a new voice crackled through the speakers, one that belonged to a grinning human engineer named Patel. "Hey everyone," she said cheerfully. "Your gods have a software update." The Xerac soldiers panicked, scrambling to restore the illusion, but it was too late. The truth was out. The holograms collapsed, revealing the cold, mechanical guts of the ship's systems. Back on the stealth ship, Captain Vasquez allowed herself a rare smile as she watched the chaos unfold through the hacked feeds. The Xerac were being exposed in real time. "You know what they say," she murmured. "Never meet your gods in person." With the projection systems offline, human hackers took over the Xerac's communications grid, broadcasting their own message to the galaxy. "This is a public service announcement," Grant said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The gods you've been worshipping? Yeah, they're frauds. Just a bunch of con artists with some fancy tech." The feed showed footage of HFY, the Xerac's malfunctioning systems, holograms flickering as soldiers scrambled to maintain order. "So if you were worried about offending them, don't be," Grant continued with a grin. "Because as it turns out, they're just as mortal as the rest of us." Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. Temples fell silent. Worshippers, once trembling in fear, began to question everything they had believed. And in the darkest corners of space, rebellions stirred. Civilizations once enslaved by fear, rising up at last. As the infiltration team made their escape, Vasquez looked back at the flagship, now in disarray. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "that's one way to kill a god." Grant chuckled. Who knew divine beings were so easy to glitch? The stealth ship sped away, disappearing into the stars. Behind them, the illusion of godhood lay in ruins. And humanity? They had just proven once again that they didn't need gods, they had themselves, and that was more than enough. The Xerac flagship drifted in confusion, its once majestic corridors now filled with flickering lights, collapsing holograms, and the shouts of panicked alien soldiers. The gods were unraveling, and they knew it. Without the projection systems, their divine facade crumbled, exposing the cold reality beneath. Captain Vasquez and her team navigated the chaos, moving deeper into the ship toward the central core, where the last remnants of the Xerac's control grid were housed. If they could disable the final systems, the Xerac wouldn't just lose their flagship, they'd lose the loyalty of the entire galaxy. "Move fast," Vasquez whispered over the comm. "They're onto us now." Behind them, alarms blared, and drones swarmed through the corridors. The infiltration was no longer stealthy, it was a race. Patel, the team's engineer, sprinted beside Grant, carrying her equipment bag over one shoulder. She glanced at her scanner. "We've got company incoming. Drones, maybe half a dozen, closing fast." "Figures," Grant muttered, not breaking stride. "Gods always come with lousy security." Captain Vasquez gave a sharp gesture. "Davis, cover our rear." Davis grinned, his rifle slung over one shoulder, as he turned to face the oncoming swarm of drones. "I've been dying for some action. Thought these gods would at least try to make it difficult." With a few quick steps, he crouched behind a bulkhead and fired in defiance, round, down the corridor. The pulse detonated with a sharp buzz, and the drones fell to the ground in a twitching heap of malfunctioning circuits. Davis blew an imaginary puff of smoke from the barrel of his rifle. Gods, my ass! The team reached the heart of the flagship, a massive chamber filled with glowing alien machinery. The walls were lined with conduits that pulsed with energy, feeding power into the projection systems and command grid. In the center of the room, a towering console thrummed with life, a vast neural network that connected the Xerax illusions to their entire fleet. This is it, Patel whispered, eyes wide with excitement. The brain of the operation. Grant slung his gear to the floor and started unpacking his tools. All right, let's kill a god. Vasquez gave a nod. We're on the clock. Get it done. Patel connected her equipment to the alien console, her fingers flying over the keys. Code scrolled across the display as she began uploading the virus. This should hit every system on this ship and spread to the rest of their fleet. Once it's done, she grinned, the galaxy sees the truth. The console beeped in warning, and the lights flickered. They're trying to shut us out, Grant muttered, working alongside Patel. Smart gods, but not smart enough. The floor trembled as the Xerax soldiers closed in, filling the air with the sound of heavy boots and the hum of energy weapons. The infiltration team could hear them approaching, a wave of resistance meant to crush them before they could finish. They're almost here, Vasquez said grimly, gripping her rifle. Grant's hands danced over his keyboard, sweat beading on his brow. Just a few more seconds. Come on, come on. Patel tapped furiously at her console, her grin replaced by a fierce determination. We're almost there. Just need to override one more firewall. The first Xerax soldier appeared in the doorway, weapon raised, only to be met with a burst of fire from Vasquez. Not today, sunshine, Vasquez muttered, as Davis and the rest of the team took up defensive positions, laying down suppressing fire to hold off the incoming troops. Grant slammed his fist on the keyboard. Done. The virus is in. Patel hit the final command, and the core shuddered as the system rebooted. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. When they came back on, the alien consoles were dead, replaced by lines of corrupted code. Across the ship, the Xerax illusions began to collapse. Holograms fizzled out mid-sentence. Projections of godly avatars flickered, glitched, and then vanished entirely. Soldiers stared in disbelief as their once immaculate surroundings were revealed to be bare utilitarian metal. The truth spread like wildfire. The gods had fallen. As the virus spread beyond the flagship, it hijacked the Xerax communication network, broadcasting the unfiltered feed to every corner of the galaxy. Civilizations that had worshipped the Xerax for generations watched in shock as the illusion shattered. The mighty gods weren't gods at all. They were beings just like any other, relying on tricks, illusions, and fear to maintain their power. This is what you've been bowing to, Grant's voice echoed across the broadcast, as the hacked feed showed the Xerax broken systems. Looks pretty divine, doesn't it? In response, revolts erupted across countless planets. Temples were torn down, statues toppled, and in the depths of space, entire fleets turned their weapons on the Xerax, no longer paralyzed by fear. On board the flagship, chaos reigned. Xerax commanders shouted conflicting orders, trying to regroup as their control crumbled, but it was too late. The illusion was gone, and with it, their power. Captain Vasquez watched the pandemonium unfold with a satisfied smile. Looks like the gods are having a bad day. Davis grinned. Good. They deserved it. Grant slung his gear over his shoulder. All right, folks, time to leave. I'm not sticking around to see how angry they get once they realize they've been pranked. Patel tapped her console one last time, sending a final signal through the Xerax network. A short, simple message for the entire galaxy. No gods, only us. The team sprinted through the ship's collapsing corridors, pursued by soldiers and drones. Though their enemies were now scattered and disorganized, they reached the stealth ship with seconds to spare, slamming the airlock shut just as the flagship began to implode. As the stealth ship launched into the void, Captain Vasquez allowed herself a moment to breathe. Mission accomplished, she said softly. The crew settled into their seats, adrenaline still thrumming through their veins. They had just destroyed a god, and it felt damn good. Back on Earth, the message continued to spread. The Xerax reign was over. No longer gods, they were just another species, lost, confused, and scrambling for relevance in a galaxy that no longer feared them. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge of her ship, staring out at the stars. Well, she murmured, that's one less god in the universe. Grant joined her, grinning, and a whole lot of free planets. The two shared a quiet moment, watching as the stars drifted by. Humanity had faced gods and won. Think they'll come back? Grant asked. Vasquez shook her head. If they do, they'll know what to expect. Grant chuckled. Yeah, no bowing, just some engineering and a little attitude. The stars stretched out before them, vast and infinite. The gods were gone, and the galaxy was theirs to explore. And for the first time, Humanity knew there were no limits. The stealth ship glided through the void, the crew catching their breath as the Zerak flagship imploded in the distance, consumed by the chaos they had sown. For a few moments, silence reigned, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's engines. The weight of what they had just accomplished began to settle over them, not in triumph, but in something quieter, relief. Grant leaned back against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well," he said, catching his breath, "that was something." Patel let out a soft laugh, still riding the high of success. "We just wrecked a god. I mean, if that's not a good day's work, I don't know what is." Vasquez gave a wry grin, her eyes fixed on the shrinking shape of the Zerak flagship as it vanished into the darkness behind them. "I'd say we sent a pretty clear message." The crew settled into their seats, the tension beginning to ebb. Davis reclined with a satisfied smirk. "So, what do we put on the after-action report?" "Mission success. Gods exposed, egos thoroughly bruised." Grant chuckled. "And no casualties either. Not bad for a bunch of mere mortals." They all laughed, the sound of it warm and unburdened. The mission had been risky, borderline suicidal, but they had pulled it off. They had exposed the Zerak for what they truly were. Not gods, just frauds hiding behind fancy tech and fear. As they drifted further away from the battlefield, Vasquez leaned back in her chair and looked out into the endless sea of stars. "You know," she said softly, "there were moments I thought we might not make it." "Same here," Grant admitted, running a hand through his messy hair. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't bet against human stubbornness." Patel grinned. "Or our love for taking stuff apart." The comm panel crackled, signaling an incoming transmission from Earth. Vasquez tapped the console, and a familiar voice filled the cabin. Command's voice, calm but tinged with awe. "We've received confirmation from the network. Your message has spread to every corner of the galaxy. Civilizations are waking up. Temples are emptying. Statues are coming down. It's over. The Zerak's hold is broken." The crew exchanged glances, a quiet sense of accomplishment passing between them. It wasn't just that they had stopped the Zerak, it was that they had shown the galaxy something it desperately needed to see. No one had to live in fear of gods anymore. "Good job, team," Command's voice continued. "Come on home. Drinks are on us." The connection cut out, leaving the crew in peaceful silence. They had won. They weren't gods, but that didn't matter. They were human, and that had been enough. Davis stretched, kicking his boots up on the console. "I guess the moral of the story is, next time someone tells us to bow, we tell them where to stick." Grant grinned. "And then we blow up their flagship for good measure." Vasquez gave a small, satisfied nod. "No gods, no masters." She glanced around at her team. "Just us." Patel leaned her head back, smiling up at the ceiling. "I like the sound of that." The stars stretched out endlessly before them, a vast and open frontier, free from the shadow of false divinity. There were no gods waiting to pass judgment, no ancient beings demanding worship, just humanity, standing tall in a universe where fear had no place. They drifted in the quiet for a moment longer, content in the knowledge that they had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for every species that had ever lived under the boot of fear. "So," Grant said, breaking the silence, "what's next? Do we go looking for more gods to blow up, or take a vacation?" Vasquez smiled. "Let's see if there's any more coffee first. After that, who knows?" Davis grinned. "Wherever we go next, one thing's for sure. If we run into any more gods, they'd better be ready." "Because we won't bow," Patel added, her voice light but firm. Vasquez's eyes twinkled as she leaned back in her seat, the stars swirling just beyond the window. There would always be new challenges, new enemies, new illusions to shatter, but they would face them together, and they would win. Because in the end, gods were just another problem to solve. And humans? Well, humans were very good at solving problems.